Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Gunlock, your host for the third episode of the Bespoke Parenting Hour. For those new to the program, this podcast is focused on how parents should custom tailor their parenting style to fit what's best for their families, themselves, and most importantly, their kids. So today I am really excited to be talking to a good friend and also just I would say my parenting guru, Lenore Skenazy. Hi, Lenore.
Hi. I always think like, oh no, don't come visit me and think, oh, I'm going to find a perfect family with perfect kids. Because that's not true. I have met
one of your sons, and he is pretty close to perfect. So, so I'm gonna. Okay, so I think what? So, okay, I feel like I have to officially introduce you because I know you so well, and I love you so much, and you had such a huge impact on my life. You had a huge impact on a profound, I would say, impact on how I raised my kids. But for those like three people who aren't very familiar with Lenore, who might be tuning in. I hope you are. Let me give I'm going to give your official bio. Okay. So Lenore is a journalist by trade. She spent 14 years at the New York Daily News as a reporter turned opinion columnist, and 2 more at the New York Sun. That's gone now, right?
Oh my God! You're talking about newspapers. This is a depressing way to start a podcast. So
wait, I'm not done.
The New York Sun, but I just have to say the New York Sun doesn't exist anymore. And as of yesterday, the New York Daily News just got rid of its newsroom. Everything has to be done from people's bedrooms. Yeah, I mean that was Superman's newspaper. I mean, if you watch the Superman movies, and there's this giant globe in the lobby, that was where I used to work, the Daily News, which they called the Daily Planet in the movies. But really, that was it. And now there's no newsroom anymore as of yesterday.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so in 2008, after her column, Why I Let My 9-Year-Old Ride the Subway Alone, landed her on every talk show from the Today Show to Dr. Phil. Lenore then founded the book and blog Free Range Kids. This is where I come in. This is where I really got to know Lenore. These launched the anti-helicopter parenting movement and garnered her the nickname America's Worst Mom. She got a promotion of sorts when Discovery Life tapped her to host the reality TV show World's Worst Mom. She's lectured everywhere from Microsoft to DreamWorks to the Sydney Opera House. She received her BA from Yale and her master's degree from Columbia. Geez, you're no dummy. This is my favorite line. This is my favorite line from this bio, which I am certain you wrote. She lives in New York City with her husband and her beloved computer. And her sons have safely flown the coop. So Lenore, my connection to Lenore is obviously the Free Range Kids, how to raise safe, self-reliant children without going nuts and worry. I would say that your book, Lenore, launched what I would call a revolution in parenting. It's certainly a movement of parents who are tired of constantly having to hover over their kids. And for me, I wanted to parent more in the way that my parents did, which involved a lot of please go away and entertain yourself. It's another way of sort of capturing what you do. So I want to, I want to talk to you about that, but maybe you could first talk to us about this. I say this new organization. It's not really new. I think it's been around for 4 or 5 years now.
3 years. You mean Let Grow, right?
Yes, Let Grow. So tell us about Let Grow and what are some of the projects that you're working on with Let Grow?
Oh my gosh, what a lovely softball question. No, really, appreciate it. So here's the deal. As you said, I let my son ride the subway. I started the movement and Free Range Kids. It said our kids are safer and smarter than our culture gives them credit for. And yes, I went around the world lecturing about it, and people would nod along. People agreed. They really loved their own childhood. They loved getting on their bikes and riding around town and not coming home till the streetlights came on. Right. And yet, they just couldn't get to that point with their own kids. And that's why, calling it the anti-helicopter parenting movement is sort of not fair, because we all became helicopter parents and we didn't mean to. And when everybody is doing the same thing, it's a culture shift. It's not individual, neurotic, overprotective parents going crazy with worry. It is a society that has started reinforcing a new I hate the word paradigm, so forget that I'm about to say it. Parenting paradigm, parenting style that said that, your kids should always be with you or with another adult, because if they're alone, they're going to be unsafe, or they're not going to be getting enough, enrichment that they can get ahead. So if you could, in the olden days, you might have sent Julie and her siblings out to play in the park, but now it's, you're going to go to lacrosse, you're going to go to gymnastics, you're going to go to Kumon or Chinese, or you name it. There's something where an adult is going to be teaching you something. Maybe you get a trophy, maybe you get a grade, maybe you get a line to put on your resume as you're applying for college. But what you don't get is free time, fun, figuring things out on your own, problem solving when your bike breaks down and you're 3 miles from home. So the society had changed so much, and there were plenty of parents who were sad about it, but they really didn't feel that they could do anything differently because the social norms were constant supervision. Yeah. And so 3 years ago, Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Coddling of the American Mind, and Peter Gray, who wrote the book Free to Learn, which I highly recommend. I actually recommend both those books as just really eye-openers about how kids learn when they're curious, when they're doing something just for the fun of it, or just because they're so driven to, make this skateboard better, and and I'm going to work on the bearings, and I'm going to shellac it this way or that. When they're doing that, they are getting so much education, and we just don't recognize it as education because it's not in a classroom. So anyways, Peter Gray, who wrote that book, and Jonathan Haidt from The Coddling of the American Mind, and Daniel Shuckman, who was the longtime chairman of FIRE, which fights for free speech on campus. Everyone was worried about, it seemed like kids were becoming anxious and depressed and fragile and sensitive. And these are not things that you want for your kids to be. You want them to be resilient. You want them to be able to, shrug off some problems or solve them, or, come to some resolution, compromise with their friends and go forward. And the theory was that maybe they were arriving on campus fragile like this because it had started sooner. And who was fighting the trends, the parenting and psychological and educational trends that were taking away kids' normal curiosity and resilience and replacing them with anxiety and depression? And of course, they found me, and I'm very glad they did. And so together we founded Let Grow. It's not Let It Grow, which is yes, Let Grow is fine. Let It Grow, bad. Let Go is not what it is. And actually, yesterday, believe it or not, I was on Dax Shepard's podcast. I got a brag here.
Awesome.
And I said, and he's married to Kristen Bell, and I said, and it's not even Let It Go.
That's
wow.
perfect.
How often do you get to do that? Yeah, isn't that cool? So anyway, so it's Let Grow. And Let Grow, our goal is not to change minds. Our goal is to change behavior, because there's a there's like a phrase that I think says it well. It's not my phrase, but it's that a lot more people change their minds after changing their behavior than change their behavior after changing their minds. Like if you start exercising, you might think like, oh, everyone should exercise, but thinking everyone should exercise and getting yourself to get up early and do that morning run, there's a lot of downtime, there's a big gap between that makes sense and me doing it. So this is devoted to me doing it. So Let Grow, trying to come up with, and has come up with, some cool ideas that make it easy and normal and legal and fun and cool to give your kids some more independence. And we can talk about those, but basically that's our mission, is to make first of all, to make people recognize that taking independence out of childhood is not a minor thing to take out, to replace it with, car rides to the soccer field every day and never have them make their own game or explore in the woods or even just stay home and noodle around with something just because it interests them. That's a big, it's like Jenga. You can't take out all these parts of childhood, the confusion and the disappointment and the betrayals and the excitement of adventure and exploring and making a friend and doing something on your own, and still expect your kid to have a solid foundation emotionally, I'd say, socially and emotionally. So we're trying to make people recognize independence is key and then make it easy to give it back.
Well, I think, first of all, I have been trying to do that myself, and I really relate to this idea of, believing it and then doing it that's a struggle that I've had. And I think I've been fairly successful with allowing my kids, but I do have an internal struggle and I do still worry. And I don't know that you'll get rid of that entirely, but
I don't. Why? Yeah, I wish.
yeah,
I wish I could get rid of it in me.
but I do, but I have in practice. I mean, my kids do a lot of things independently, and I'm proud of myself. But I want to go back to Let Grow and talk specifically about your outreach to schools. But first, I just want you to talk a little bit about, it goes beyond helicoptering your own kids. And know that I've dealt with this personally. It's about what's, I think, the most dangerous part of helicopter parenting. Look, if people want to helicopter parent their kids, I mean, I don't think it's good, and I don't think it's good for their kids. And they're going to go, you have this, you have all these studies showing kids go off to college and have like anxiety attacks because they don't know how to live. They don't know how to take care of themselves. I may not agree with it, but if you want to do it, that's fine. But it's a matter of helicoptering other people's kids. I mean, our friend Bethany Mandel, she's been attacked for leaving her kid in the car for 2 minutes. I was confronted by someone for leaving my kids in the car for 10 minutes, and it was all the windows were down. It was a 60-degree day, and so talk a little bit about how much has your movement, and I really do think this is your movement. How much has it made an impact in that area of telling people to, mind your own damn business? And as long, I mean, obviously, and look, I don't need to say this. Like, obviously, if you're leaving a kid on a, 90-degree day, 80-degree day with the windows rolled up, or sunny day with the windows rolled up, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, letting my 8-year-old ride his bike around the block, or go run an errand for me, or, young kids having, summer jobs. I mean, I'm interested in, it's become, parents are arrested. Parents have been prosecuted. How much of an impact do you think you've made, and also Let Grow has made in this area?
Right. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about mind your own business, because that's really interesting, because I feel like the public has been misled into the idea that sort of leads to helicopter parenting, that all children are in danger all the time, unless there is an adult with them. So we're just redoing our crime statistics page, because crime statistics are just kind of extraordinary. Crime has been going down so dramatically since the early 90s. And yet, if you do, not me, if Gallup does these polls to ask, is crime going up or down? And the majority of people still think it's been going up. And they've been thinking this all along as it's been going down. So I feel like these busybodies, to a certain extent, are, first of all, they're misinformed, because it just, if you turn on the TV or you look at Facebook, it seems like everybody's being snatched off the street and sex addict, which thank God isn't true. And for the record, I spoke with the head of the Crimes Against Children Research Center. That's the center that does the reports for the FBI, crunches the numbers. And the head of it is a guy named David Finkelhor. And I asked him, how many kids have been taken from their parents while they were shopping at Target or IKEA, or, just doing some regular old errand, and, taken from the parents, snatched away before the parents could say stop, and sold into sex slavery. And the answer was, I think you can guess from the tone of my voice, what's the number? What do you think, Julie?
0.
It is.
0.
The number is literally 0. Yeah, just like the number of kids poisoned by a stranger's candy. I mean, for some reason, we really love believing that there's just a lot of, very normal-looking situations that turn out to be as horrible as anything on earth. But really, most times a horrible situation, most time a normal situation is a normal situation. There aren't people trying to poison your kids.
And
yes.
Can I just also interrupt for one quick second? Say there is this weird thing in Hollywood where there are entire shows dedicated to like crimes against kids. There's
I know.
Oh,
it's sickening. Yeah.
There's a fetishistic kind of obsession with it that really I find disturbing, and frankly, I find a lot of things disturbing in Hollywood. But I think that also adds to it, like you say, this the constant drumbeat that this could actually happen when the number is 0.
Right. Well, first of all, it's such an easy way to engage a viewer or a reader. Right. I mean, I think of it as like a cheap trick, really. If on
Yes.
page 3, this adorable child that we've just seen her, celebrating her birthday and clutching her unicorn, at page 3, she's dead in a ditch. Well, you've grabbed most readers, not me, but a bunch of readers. And certainly Liam Neeson has figured out how to fake an entire genre of snatching, which is to have your child snatched while on a Parisian vacation and sold at a very stylish auction on a yacht to a Saudi prince. I mean, it was as florid as like the black and white movies of the silent movie era, when everyone was worried about white slavery, and yet
almost classy.
People make their it's almost fun. Anyways, the thing is that your brain is taking in all this information, and it would be great if all of us, well, it might be bad, but if we were totally rational, we would say, that does not happen. Let me look at the statistics. I am going to do my research. But we don't, right? We go, oh my God.
We're not Vulcan. We haven't, yeah.
Right.
And,
so you see, I mean, I think there's like 17 Liam Neeson movies at this point on the same theme. And boy, those Balkan kidnappers are just
honestly, if I could do it over, why am I trying to reassure people? There's so much more money in scaring people. Right.
I know. I always felt that way too. It's like, why did I write Free Range Kids? It's like, lock your kids up. Here's why. And then it's like, did you hear about this horrible case? And once I saw a movie about that, and don't forget all the Law and Order episodes.
Right.
So your brain is taking all this in, and then if there's a case anywhere, anytime, when I let Izzy ride the subway at age 9, I was getting calls from people saying, what about Eitan? It was a tragedy in New York. A kid was stolen from a bus stop, but it was in 1979, and this was in 2008. And so if you have to go back that far to come up with a story, why are you thinking about that horrible thing instead of the intervening 30 years when 180 million kids went to the bus stop and weren't taken?
Well, this pervades every aspect of our life. I mean, you mentioned the bus stop. I remember, my school district, the officials in my school district, they're used to my complaints, but they canceled school over and over again for some minor snow. But then the snow had been shoveled, and they had packed the snow into these piles. Okay. And again, this is Washington, D.C. We're a southern city. I mean, well, I live outside. I live in Alexandria, Virginia. We're a southern city, and we don't get a ton of snow, but we happen to get one of these freak storms. But again, the roads were cleared. Everything was fine. But the snow had been piled near bus stops, which was like genius. And so they were afraid that kids would climb, then slide down, then get in the road and be run over. Okay. And I say,
wow.
Okay, first of all, that's probably not going to happen. But, there's probably you can't make rules based on this, like, oh, what if this happens? Because you could also have a car lose control, like an elderly person who loses control of the car and plows into the kids. I mean, you could do this all day. You talk about sometimes the falling chandelier, the falling piano, it's like, you can't not walk down a street because you're afraid something might hit you on the head. A bird could die mid-flight and hit you in the head, so, but it's interesting too. And we don't have, I don't know how much you want to talk about school reopenings, and I'm getting off track here because I want to get back to let grow.
But I want to go on to the story about the snow in front of the bus stop, because what's interesting is that we reward the most fantastical, imaginary, people who can come up with worst case scenarios are considered the most caring, right? And I always call it worst first thinking, because after the thing that took me years to figure out is when I was interviewed over and over again about why did you let your son ride the subway by himself, and I'd say he wanted to do it. We're always on the subway. It's statistically extremely safe. I knew where he was and what he was doing, and we discussed it before, and he could read a map, he speaks the language, blah, 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 blah. And the question that followed up almost inevitably was, but how would you have felt if he hadn't come home?
Oh, I know.
And what was interesting about that is that, first of all, he had. So, and then secondly, you know how I would feel.
Right.
So why are you asking? And it took me a long time to realize I was not being asked in the sense of a normal question. I was being chastised because I had done wrong think. I had thought about the literal odds and my
Yes.
kid and my city and my experience in the city and his readiness, as opposed to going to the worst case scenario. And to be considered a good parent, and I guess a good school administrator now, you have to go to that dark place first. I call it worst first thinking. Think of the worst case scenario first and proceed as if it's likely to happen. So when there's some snow in front of a bus stop, and instead of saying, wow, it's going to be inconvenient, or I guess they should stand a little to the side of the bus stop, or
or trusting kids to stand to the left of the pile of snow. That's another thing. That's one thing that I've always loved about you, is you truly love kids. It's one thing that I think is just I think is so often not talked about, is how we treat kids like they're stupid. And one thing you've always done is say, look, maybe we should trust these kids not to always make stupid decisions. Kids are smarter than we give them. You say this all the time. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. And when you limit them, you limit their ability to test themselves, then they just, they don't know. They maybe don't make as good decisions because they haven't had to. But this is interesting. This sort of worst case scenario. I don't think a lot of people, I sort of am in the regulatory field. I write about the regulatory sort of, world. And what I don't think people know, though, is this worst case scenario is actually a way in which governments regulate. It's called the precautionary principle. And I always say it.
Aren't we talking about the precautionary principle? It's like, if it hasn't been done before, you better not do it because it might not be safe.
It's the better safe than sorry. It's the better safe than sorry rule. And you think about a mom. I've had this happen to me. I say, hey, my kid would like, this is very, very modern day. Hey, can we do a play date? And, I found myself saying things like, I don't really want to host a bunch of dirty children in my house. How about they meet up at the local elementary school, ride their bike and then go, shoot some hoops or whatever. And, I would get who's going to be at the playground to watch them while they play. And, I would kind of get this sense of, well, it's better just to be safe than sorry. And I, in my mind, I'm hearing all of the, the ways in which I've heard products actually regulated in that way. It's very stifling. So this sort of thought process goes way beyond parenting. It gets into the marketplace, which, I feel like that's a whole nother podcast, but this is really pervasive in our society in all areas. And certainly we're seeing that now with the reopening of the schools with coronavirus, where you have people saying, look, if one child is infected, look, we can't take that risk. Meanwhile, we have some serious emotional and psychological problems going on. We have vulnerable sets of the population of, children who are from poor families and minority students that don't do well or don't have the equipment to do virtual learning. And so it's interesting to me that we have to consider that one most horrible outcome, and they're setting policy on that. What are your thoughts about school reopenings?
Oh my God. There's so many thoughts. Actually, I haven't even, believe it or not, because my kids are older, I haven't truly thought what I would do if school was reopening in my neighborhood and my kids were young. I can't say what I would do. It's as simple as that. I'm agnostic on that, and I'm hoping that parents are all muddling through it and allowed to make their own decisions, and whatever decision they make is legit. I think if you want your kids to go back to school and the school is open, that's not a cause for shame. If you want your kids to stay home, if God forbid you make your own pod, you're not being a terrible person. You're just trying to figure it out. We all are. There were so many other things that you're saying that I kept wanting to think about and chew on. One is a better safe than sorry is an expression that implies if you're not safe, like whatever we've decided safe is, you will be sorry. Yes. And that's not true. It's a bad framing. It makes the precautionary principle, which is don't do anything if it hasn't been done before because it might not be safe, into something that makes sense, because if you're not safe, then you will be sorry. But it's possible, and in fact, we wouldn't have civilization as it exists today if people weren't trying things that were new ideas, and some of them weren't safe, and some people, there was Apollo 13, there was you can't make any progress if your only goal is utter and complete safety, and that anything that goes wrong will be cause for either a giant lawsuit or you being thrown in jail. And so when you're asking about, schools thinking about what they can do, and whether it's reopening during COVID or, letting kids come to school when the snow is piled up, if they are worried that they will be sued because they can't be God and make sure that everything is perfectly safe in every step of the way. Sure, you want to make your school safe, and you don't want to, cover the floor in, marbles,
Right,
that's a bad idea. And you don't want to say, every kid gets a machete and now it's time for recess. But, probably bad. And I might even be inclined to sue my school if that was what they did. But the idea of the waivers all the time for everything of we're going, when my kids were little and they were going to a field trip, quote unquote field trip, which was to the park, that was like 2 blocks from the school. I had to sign a waiver as if they were going to Gambia, and would they have to get their shots first? Would they have to learn a little language? It was are they going by boat, rickety boat? So the weird thing is, once again, we're getting back to the idea that if you are not only cautious, I like caution. I might say I am a cautious and nervous parent, even though people think I'm not. But, I like helmets and mouth guards and seatbelts and I like vaccines. I like things that keep you allowed to live your life. Seatbelt doesn't change the fact that you're getting there at the same time. And, a vaccine can prevent you from getting a disease. And, a helmet while you're riding a bike, I pretty much think those are great. So those are choices and they make sense to me. But to be fantasizing that there's something crazy about taking 25 9-year-olds across the street to the park to the point where it needs to be legally, notarized before you're allowed to do that, that's turning regular life into this, first of all, danger zone, and then legal minefield. And I would love to dial back from the idea that we should be seeing everything through the lens of what could go tragically wrong and who could we blame and and how can we sue?
Well, this caution, you talk about, the waiver. I mean, I know your kids are, you've got one still in college, so your kids are way past the phase of needing, of being in that. So you're telling a story that's quite old, that's, over a decade old or so. And you think about it, that culture of waivers and nervousness was has been well established by today. That cautious culture has been well established. And you think now the coronavirus hits. I mean, of course, no parent should be shocked that schools are staying permanently closed. If they are going to make parents, give the results of a blood test and like a security background test and sign a waiver and do all sorts of stuff to take kids across the street, when they're not going to open schools. And so so we're in this situation. What bothers me, and I don't want this to turn into a school reopening conversation, although I swear I could talk to you for 4 hours about a variety of topics, but
actually, I'm really interested in. It really is the issue of our day.
It is. And
I'm so agnostic. So talk to me about what you're thinking makes sense and doesn't.
Well, in the nature of this podcast, I'm talking about, I really believe that, and you have also influenced me in this way, that I believe parents should be allowed to, parent the way they see fit, right? I think that's really important. And you've always been so kind about, like, even with helicopter parents, you've been very sympathetic to them and said, I get it. I understand why you're nervous, but these things are good for kids. So, what bothers me so much is, and this is, I'm more talking about the public schools here, because I think there is a lot more flexibility in private parochial schools, at least from my own experience talking to other parents. There is no choice. You will do what we have decided, and there is no flexibility. For instance, my children.
Wait, is that true?
It is true. Well, at least in my case. So my school district.
Okay, yeah, tell me.
Well, my school district is not being flexible And when I talk about flexibility, I'm talking about, for instance, I wrote an essay in the spring, actually in the summer, about how my kids fared with the virtual learning. And I'll just give you a hint. They didn't do well. Okay. And my youngest, who doesn't have any learning disabilities, doesn't have any learning problems, he struggled so much. And it was because there was like there would be, for one little assignment, there would be 4 different programs. Like he had to watch a video, then he had to watch a video over here, then he had to do a questionnaire, then he had to go to a different program to turn in the questionnaire. So he had to be on, so there were like 4 different, and it was just too much for him. He's a little kid, he's 10 years old, right? And also they're not online a lot. So I asked the teacher, I'd like some paper-based stuff. I have a printer, I have a computer. Can you please email me this stuff? Nope. We need to do it via the computer. So what I'm talking about is it's because the school district itself has created a system, an online system, and that's the way they're doing it. And so grading is via this online format, and turning things in is via this. So if you send a paper-based, well, you can't then turn it into the teacher. And look, I think some individual teachers, I just happened to get one who wasn't really very flexible. Maybe but the bottom line is there's still a grading system, and it's all virtual, and they've all set this stuff up virtually. And what makes me mad is we have a distribution system in this country, a nationwide distribution system where schools are closed, are physically closed, and yet they're still handing out meals. And I'm not arguing that. Many of these kids need these meals. If there is a logistics system already set up, a distribution system, a very sophisticated distribution system set up to hand out bologna sandwiches, why can't teachers curate some paper-based products that kids can then get, and then they can be turned in? I just don't believe it's not possible. And the bottom line is there's not even conversations about it. And so I think for kids who don't really do well in an online format and a virtual format, I wish that there were more choices. I wish that there was more flexibility about this. And I'm not asking, I also want my kids to go back to school. I have thought about this. I've looked at the data, just like you with crime statistics. I've looked at the data on the amount of children who've been hospitalized, the number of deaths, the number of infections. And I am confident that this is not a disease that is really risky for kids. And so with certain measures in place, with hand washing stations and limiting the number of kids in the classroom and wearing masks, I'm perfectly fine with doing that. They're doing it in South Korea. They're doing it in many Asian countries. They're doing it in Europe. And so I'm kind of frustrated by this sort of, we're closing the schools. But at the same time, I understand, and I'm not going to argue that. In light of that, I wish there was more flexibility for parents, so that parents who do have kids who struggle with virtual, there was a little, and frankly, what would be really nice, Lenore, is a little bit of sympathy. Sympathy. I write the school administrators, and there seems to be no sympathy about kids who are struggling. One of my children has an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. And they have said, and now there's a good amount of data out there and research that shows, certain kids have more trouble than others with the virtual learning. And one of these groups is kids with IEPs, ADHD, autism, ADD. And my school district just announced that even IEPs are going to be, they say they're going to meet the IEP requirements with virtual learning. And so it just frustrates me that even for that demographic, the ones that are most vulnerable in this situation, not to the disease, but actually to not learning. So, but I've gone on a long time here. And I think if you hear me talking, and I want to ask you about this, and this will kind of get us back on track. You can tell I'm very worried academically. I'm worried about what the school is going to teach them, they're going to walk away. I read a Washington Post article that you wrote about try and very respectfully telling parents to just take a deep breath and relax a little bit about the sort of loss of education. One thing I try to listen, I try to hear your voice in my head when I'm freaking out about this stuff, is there's other ways that kids can learn. Talk to parents, because I feel like I've just freaked everyone out with this diatribe. Talk to me about how, your kids learn in other ways. It's not necessarily what they're going to learn on some virtual learning application from their school.
Right. Sorry, I just thought I heard my husband in the other room calling me, but he wasn't. Totally not needed in this family. So, what's interesting to me is that we did a study. We surveyed 800 parents and 800 kids ages 8 to 13, not the same parents of the same kids, and then we did it again twice during the pandemic so far. And we asked parents questions that weren't about academics. We asked them, are you seeing your kid develop any new interests? Are they doing things independently now? Are they helping around the house? We gave parents a list of adjectives, angry, disappointed, proud, amazed, half were good and half were bad. And that was a question of how do you feel when you're looking at your kids? And the parents were, for the most part, the 5 top adjectives were all the good ones: amazed, proud, surprised, delighted. And I don't think they were surprised and delighted by the academics going on in their home, because a lot of people were frustrated and a lot of people were surprised at how short the lessons were, or how confusing it was to, like you were talking about, to figure out, this thing is on YouTube and this thing is on Google, and what are we supposed to do and how do we hand it in? But what they were amazed by is the emergence of I would say a quirkier or maybe more self-directed kid than they had seen before, because before there was no time for that kid to emerge. I mean, if you have to, get up early and go to school and then, do your homework and get to soccer, and then there's the reading log, and don't forget to make the diorama. And then the next day it's all the same except for soccer substitute piano or Kumon. A lot of kids' days were structured and supervised by someone else, by an adult teaching them something. And so they learned those things. They learned soccer and they learned, Mandarin, but they didn't figure out something that just innately or intrinsically interested them. Everything was extrinsic.
Right.
And so I wrote down a list. So on the kids survey, it turned out that the kids, we gave them a list of adjectives as well, bored, angry, happy, sad. I can't remember what all of them were, but I can tell you number 1 was bored, which doesn't surprise me. But then, and number 2 was happy. And at the very bottom of the 10 was sad. And I think the boredom and the happy are 2 sides of this double helix. Like, they never had a chance to be bored. They were, they were picked up at 3:07 and then, deposited at soccer at 3:22. And then they had their soccer practice until 5. And then they, got in the car and they were doing their homework or, playing on the iPad. And then they got back and there's time for a fast dinner before all the other homework and stuff. So when I asked kids, when we, I should say, Let Grow, asked kids, what new thing are you doing just for fun? Not for school. And I'm just going to read you a couple of them. I learned about Mayans. I learned how to braid hair, how to clean the toilet, how to draw SpongeBob, how to roller skate, coding. Corn causes mucus in the body. That was one of my favorites. I learned about owls and where they live and how they hunt. Like this one, socialism is bad because you cannot get something for nothing, said one kid. Right? Yeah, really. Maybe it was yours. How to put on a new door handle, how to use a microscope, cooking, singing, reading, how to tie my shoes, tricks on the trampoline, and my favorite one of all, I learned my sister has a boyfriend.
Oh,
so, yeah. But I mean, it really reminded me of an old-fashioned childhood. Dogs are colorblind. I learned how to make noodles. This thing floats, that thing floats. And really, that is all education. And we don't recognize it as such because there's not, it's not an SAT question. What does the corn do to body, to the body? Yeah. Or, can you put on a door handle? Yes or no? Please send a video. And yet think about, so you're putting on a door handle. You're learning how to use a tool, how to figure out what fits, how to deal with the fact that now it's turning backwards and how do you make it go the right way? And so that's frustration tolerance. It is experiential learning. It is dexterity. It is, seeing something through from ideation to completion. And, when you put it in these sort of boring, teachery words, then you can see it. But for the most part, it's I feel bad that parents have been sort of taught like something is educational when there's a test, and when it's taught in the classroom, when there's a test, and when you can see the kid's grade through the school's portal. And in fact, there are societies, before ours, and in some places still, that don't even have a word for play versus learning, because when you're a kid and you're watching what adults do and you're imitating them, that's really fun and you're driven to do that. But by the way, so is it play or is it learning? And we have separated the two so far that when we see kids doing something just for fun, we don't even give them or what's happening any credit. And so the thing I would love parents to sort of relax into a little bit is that when your kids are doing something just for fun, and that includes some video games where you're learning, strategy and cooperation, and you're having the social emotional connection to your friends on the team, or you're learning frustration tolerance because it's hard to get to the next level, and you do have to put in, my God, my kids are putting a lot of time in, working your way up from level A to level B. Those are not nothing. And they're so not, even for you, your kids are struggling, if you had to take your kids out for a while, or if your kids get bad grades for a while because they're just not going to hand in these things because it's too hard to, you can't hand in a printout and you can't use, you're having trouble with the online portal. Remember that all education is not school. And,
that's right.
And, watch what your kids are getting into and give them the time. And if you have, I'd say don't get so much into what they're doing that it becomes your project rather than theirs. Like, oh, I see you like to draw SpongeBob. Let's download all the Disney characters and everybody from Nickelodeon. And then, and each day you can draw 3 of them and I'll give you a gold star. That's sort of taking it away from them. Right. And so if you can, on the other hand, if there's some art supplies around, or if you've got some blank sheets of paper, which apparently you do since you can't print out any of your answers for your kids' tests, do that. And that's it. I mean, in a way, we've had so much school that we missed the other part of education. So now we're going heavy into the self-directed education.
Well, this is incredibly, I will say personally, it's if I weren't on a podcast right now, I'd probably burst into tears because that is incredibly helpful to me, because I am stressing and I am a little bit helicoptering on their education. I am a little bit hover-like, and I can see that I'm not using the skills I have as a free ranger in terms of play and learning or in like experiencing life. I'm not free ranging with school. I'm really hovering, and this is very instructive for me. And it's interesting. I talked about, how I thought you really started a revolution for raising kids, but this is, in some ways, this coronavirus and school shutdowns and just the togetherness, the constant togetherness, is really, it's interesting how it might also, we may see a bit of a revolution in parenting and in terms of sort of how kids learn. And I hope so, because, this has been a learning curve for me too. And I really think that, I when I think about that list that you provided, my kids have baked bread. They all know how to make their own breakfast because, I work in the morning, and I say, you get up and you take care of yourself. Where it used to be, they came down, we have this little breakfast bar, and then I would make their breakfast, and then I'd pack their lunch, and then they'd get ready, and the husband would make sure they got dressed and down and pack their backpacks, and then I'd give them their lunches, and we had this very strict routine. And now I'm like, and it's not a restaurant. Get yourself a bowl of cereal, make yourself some toast. But one of my son's favorite accomplishments is that he can make an over easy egg. And
that's
I know
hard. That's really hard.
That is really hard. I know adults, on some of these cooking shows, they tell the person, like, make a perfect either sunny side or but really over easy, because it's the flipping. Sunny side is not sunny side is like half of it. Yeah, exactly. If you can flip it and not break this delicate egg yolk, right? So that is just a huge accomplishment. And basically the reason he learned to do it is because I was too busy. Make your own dang egg, right? Was the sort of mantra for me. And so it is really important that parents remember. It used to be, I read all the Laura Ingalls Wilder books when I was little.
Oh,
And
yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes, of course they walked to school and they had a one-room schoolhouse. But, she did an awful lot of
Mm-hmm.
chores with Pa, and Pa gave her an awful lot of things to do.
Mm-hmm.
Same with, I just
Mm-hmm.
read Where the Red Fern Grows with my youngest. And,
Oh, I didn't
this
read that.
kid, I mean, have you read that, Lenore?
No,
Have
I
you read?
haven't.
Okay, now that is
I just
like,
I just recently read for the first time, like last year, Little House on the Prairie, and
oh,
tell me about Where the Red Fern Grows, and then I will remind you about something about Little House on the Prairie that
okay,
I think
okay.
you got wrong.
Well,
Okay, go.
you should definitely read Where the Red Fern Grows, because this is about a young
Okay.
boy. I think he's probably 13, 14, maybe 12. I don't know, but he's around that. He's a
Mm-hmm.
very young boy, and he saves up his own money and walks to town to buy
Mm-hmm.
two coon hounds. And these are the like the hunters, and
Right.
he the hunting dogs are, they make that crazy noise, and he hunted
How do you know that
raccoons.
from a book?
Well, they actually they write out that sound, and then it's so funny. I read it to the kids, and then we heard a coonhound in the neighborhood, and I'm like, oh my God! We were all making the sound because we were so excited to actually
Oh,
hear an
wow.
actual
Wow.
coonhound.
Mm-hmm.
So they hunt raccoons, and the raccoons would go
Mm-hmm.
into a tree, and they called it when the
They
hound
tree the
finds
raccoon. Yeah.
they bark at the raccoon. They can kill the raccoon. Anyway, so this boy would skin them, and he'd sell. This does not take place in 2020. Okay, this takes place in
Mm-hmm.
1920, and he'd
Mm-hmm.
sell the pelts, and he made his own money.
Mm-hmm.
And there were moments where his mom would get very nervous, and there were some terribly one boy actually dies in the book. It's a really exciting book, but I mean, talk about ultimate free ranging, and talk about a kid
Mm-hmm.
who learns his
Mm-hmm.
limits and who takes risks. It's a fabulous, fabulous book. I don't remember what the point of this story was. I don't remember why I told you that I read that book.
I think it was that he was getting a lot out of
Oh yes, he was.
the
Yeah,
work that he was doing, and the saving of the money, and the
right, and
having a goal.
right, and he didn't attend, and there was no conversation, there was no discussion of schooling and arithmetic
Mm-hmm.
and things
how
like
to
that.
do
But
on how to do on the subtraction
but my
quiz.
goodness, this kid was learning a tremendous amount about life. So tell me about so you just read Little House?
Yeah, I just read Little House on the Prairie, and first of all, what a great book! I really, really enjoyed it. And secondly, they weren't going to a schoolhouse; they were going nowhere. The year that the Little House on the Prairie book occurs, it's after they had left Wisconsin. Maybe they'd been going to school there, and before they move on, because that Little House on the Prairie, I hate to be a spoiler, but they leave it, and they're going on to their next adventure afterwards. But so that's a year when basically she and her sister, I'd say like 8 and 6 years old, and then they have a little baby sister who's like 2 or 3, go outside and they chase the prairie hens, whatever those are. And sometimes they go with their dad places, and sometimes they do a little, sweeping of the chimney or the hearth or whatever. Right. But mostly it's free time. And look that's the story of a woman who went on to write one of the best-selling series of all time. Looks like she missed an entire year of school, right? So,
right.
We really believe that second grade must follow first grade, and then third grade must come, and you have to learn certain things by certain milestones, and the portals that parents have now, you not only see their grades, you see how they did every day behaviorally, and how they did on each spelling quiz. And it is micromanagement of a very narrow band of learning that we have exalted above the rest. And I don't even think teachers think that that's all there is for kids to learn.
Right.
I think teachers love to see children blossoming. So I have to put in a word here for one of the Let Grow initiatives is a free project for schools, or it can be done at home. It's called the Let Grow Project. What a clever name. And what it is it's telling kids that your homework assignment is to do something on your own. And when a school sends that home, either by remote learning or in class learning, and there's this little piece of paper that goes home, it does two things. First of all, it pushes the parent to do something, right? We were talking about how behavior change is really the catalyst for all change. So, the kid says, well, I want to walk the dog. And, maybe it's too dangerous a neighborhood. No, but you can cook dinner, or you can, do your over easy egg or whatever. So they're going to do something independently. So, and then it also frames it for the teacher and for the parents as this is part of their education. And I just have to tell you a little story about a third grade teacher who did this actually at Title I school. Title I is where a lot of kids get free or reduced lunch. There are a lot of immigrant kids at this particular school. And he said, but by third grade, you can often tell who's going to sink and who's going to swim at school. And I didn't realize it happens that soon, but he said it does. And yet when you introduce the Let Grow project, everyone can swim because, okay, you're struggling with multiplication, but you learn to ride your bike without your training wheels. And this kid learned how to, make tortillas. And this kid taught her sister, how to do a cartwheel. And there was one kid who came in every week or so and told the class what was happening with his, he was making an amphibious vehicle out of a little truck. And, what happened this week? Well, it sank, but next week I'm adding the noodles. What happened this week? Well, I added the noodles, but then one fell off. Now what? So you could succeed even if you're a bad, quote unquote, bad student. You have all these other assets and interests and curiosities and capacities that are never celebrated at school because they're not something that's on a test, and it's not something that everyone is doing the same thing. But so all these kids would bound up the stairs to tell Gary, this amazing teacher, what they had done for the Let Grow project. School becomes a place, even for those who were struggling, a place of success, because you could say, hey, I got the thing to float, and the motor's working or whatever. So it allowed the kids to succeed. And then the other sort of surprise benefit for Gary was that he doesn't speak Spanish, and a lot of the parents of these kids don't speak English. And so there was very little communication between him and the families. But once the Let Grow project was introduced, then actually a lot of the dads started texting him photos. Look, this is my daughter making the muffins, right? This is my son helping me. Here's the hammer. He was painting the room or whatever. And boys making muffins and girls hammering, let's not say sexist. But the point is that suddenly even it was sort of like who's going to sink or swim as parents, and they all got a chance to swim. And so now, because of remote learning, we have it's called the Let Grow Independence Kit, which is the same thing. It's a list of ideas of things that kids can do at home, but everything's free. An explanation to the parents that this is learning, and a little form that if the kids want to fill out, looks like a leaf, I did this, and here's how I felt, and here's what worked, or whatever. So that's it. I just want to say that there is all this learning that we've forgotten about, all the Laura Ingalls Wilder and Where the Red Fern Grows and third graders Title I school learning that can go on once we sort of widen our vision away from learning is only what's on the worksheet.
This is just so encouraging, Lenore. And before I conclude this podcast, which honestly it's very hard to because I write notes. I write notes, and I've got about 17 things to follow up on questions.
I had notes too. Hollywood written, the toxic sentimentality we haven't turned out.
My favorite was frustration. What did you say? Frustration tolerance. I mean, is that not just the key phrase for this entire last 4 months? So, both for kids and for.
Okay, go on. I'm sorry. I just want to jump in. Frustration tolerance is also what your son has learned making eggs over easy because they can't always work. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And I have learned frustration tolerance, allowing him to, because this is the thing, and I will end it now, but I will tell you, I am a little bit of a nut on cleanliness and organization. And so when I say, they would come and sit down at the breakfast table, and that wasn't a chore for me. That was a control thing for me. I was able to, because there's plenty of parents who get their kids up from school and say, get yourself ready. I know parents who just sort of wave goodbye from the bed, to their kids who are off to school. And so, part of it was a control thing for me. And so it's been a real challenge to sort of let them make a bit of a mess in the kitchen. And, I'm trying to explain to them they need to clean up, but that's been a bit of frustration tolerance learning for me as well. But I really do think that this podcast has been so helpful, just frankly, to learn more about your movement, and also to this will, if for the parents that are tuning in, it will really help them remember a perspective is a very big thing for me with this podcast. At the end of the podcast, I always and I have one today. I always talk a little bit. I give some historical perspective. Basically, I tell horrible stories of things that happened to children 100 years ago, so that parents kind of remember, that put things in perspective. Like, for instance, talk about crime. What was crime like in the 1970s? Not good, right? So, so that is one thing, is giving parents some perspective on this during the COVID-19 school shutdowns, during all this sort of staying at home and mask wearing, that kids learn in other ways. So I really want to thank you. If you can, just before we hang up here, if you could tell everyone where to reach you and where to find all your stuff, and talk about a little bit about reaching going to the Let Grow website, that'd be great.
Oh, sure. So I would say go to the Let Grow website. What a good idea. Let Grow is LetGrow.org, although we did get .com. So you'll get to us either way. If you want to write to me, if you have a story or a question, I love especially hearing stories of growth. But I'm open to anything. It's Lenore, Lenore, at letgrow.org. And that's it. The Let Grow Project and the Let Grow Independence Kit are there. Or if you write to me and you want me to send you the link, okay, I will. It's really easy. And like I said, everything's free. So we're a nonprofit, and we are just dedicated to making independence recognized as an important part of childhood, because without it, we feel that kids are not getting everything they need. And to make children who are growing up thriving and, a little bit curious, a little bit spunky, giving them independence, especially during COVID, seems like a great idea.
Lenore, thank you so much for coming on. I hope not to bug you too much, but I'm probably going to ask you to come on a lot, because I think I feel like this is therapy for me. And
why don't we just call it for what it is? You probably won't even air this, right? It's just I'm sorry.
Exactly. This is I actually get paid a salary to to have to do this, and then I get therapy on the side. This is all a lie. I'm actually just on the phone with you. Tim, the producer, hung up hours ago. So anyway, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, thank you, Julie. I love talking to you too. Thanks a lot.
So I think this that conversation with Lenore really is a nice segue into how I'm going to end the podcast today, which I always end my podcast with a little bit of historical perspective here. I think it helps people sort of realize that we've got it pretty good nowadays. And so it was interesting. I was looking at the school closures, and I was curious how it was handled in 1918 during the Spanish flu, another global pandemic. And I found this article in the Washington Post, May 13th, called "During the 1918 Flu Pandemic, At-Home Learning Meant Little Schoolwork." So I think this will be a little reassuring, and again is a nice tie-in with what Lenore was saying. So the Washington Post reporter interviewed Debbie Schaefer-Jacobs. She's the curator in the Division of Cultural and Community Life at the Smithsonian. And she says that teachers probably sent reading assignments home, but schoolwork was minimal. And again, it's important to know that schools did close. They fully closed during the 1918 flu. So she said again that teachers probably sent reading assignments home, but schoolwork was minimal. If students wanted to practice spelling, they used alphabet or speller boards. I'm not really sure what that is, but they were a popular learning toy at the time. And then she says outside of school, kids kept busy with chores. Many children also had jobs, from delivering newspapers to helping on farms and even working in factories. That began to change in the 1930s. I think that's a good thing, when the government enacted laws regulating how much children could work. But it is interesting that in those days, learning was different. Teachers probably saw that okay, I'm going to send some reading home, maybe some lists of books that they should be reading. Many kids probably read the Bible. But again, teachers probably recognized that kids were going to learn in other ways by actually doing work and chores and things around the house and around the farms. So I hope that offers you a little reassurance. Obviously, schools are doing a lot more. We may not agree with the form the way in which it's being done, but certainly there's a lot more instruction given to kids than there was 100 years ago. So I think that's a nice way to conclude this podcast today. Thanks everyone for being here for another episode of the Bespoke Parenting Hour. If you enjoyed this episode or like the podcast in general, please leave a rating or review on iTunes. This helps ensure that the podcast reaches as many listeners as possible. If you haven't subscribed to the Bespoke Parenting Hour on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, please do so you won't miss an episode. Don't forget to share this episode and let your friends know that they can get Bespoke episodes on their favorite podcast app. From all of us here at the Independent Women's Forum, thanks for listening.